This month on 219 West, beneath the traffic-clogged streets of Manhattan, engineering students are building a Formula One race car engine.
New York is growing green and going green, literally. One innovator wants to install gardens on top of city buses.
The MTA has 4,500 buses. Like if we covered each of their buses, that would be around 35 acres of new green space.
Saving energy and transforming a community. One Brooklyn neighborhood goes green and saves green for its residents.
5 years ago, New York City pledged to reduce the size of public school classrooms. So what happened? And does class size really matter?
First, it was the big box store selling designer clothes. Now, it's a big box truck.
Because it isn't something that people have done. So you can't look up a manual and say, well, how do you run a truck? Like, how do you run a boutique on wheels?
I'm Melissa Noel.
I'm Patricia Reymayen.
I'm Kizzy Cox.
I'm Tom DeChristopher.
And I'm Althea Chang. We'll have these stories next on 219 West. We're now heading into the summer driving season. People get into their cars and head out onto the open road. New Yorkers are accustomed to gridlock and congestion, not the open road. But one group of engineering students is getting hands-on experience that might be surprising in a place as densely populated as Manhattan. They're building and racing their own car. This may look like a suburban, garage-built go-kart, but it's really a race car, built by students. They test drive their car in Queens, but the real work is done at Cooper Union, one of the country's leading arts and engineering schools, right here in Manhattan. The students here are among the elite, attending a tuition-free college. The school's experimental automotive lab is headed by mechanical engineering professor George Delagrammaticus. About a dozen students spend hours each day working with their hands. David Hom is earning his master's in engineering at Cooper Union. He's been using a machine that works like a virtual car to test an engine he designed himself.
So it's a way to test vehicles and come up with certain metrics you're looking for, like miles per gallon, like fuel economy.
But grad students aren't the only ones getting practical experience. Even freshmen can get their hands dirty.
Going to college, to engineering school especially, isn't about strictly reading the textbook and having a professor regurgitate line by line bedtime stories in a lecture. It's the understanding and the comprehension of synthesizing these different concepts that we're trying to get across to our students.
Students who start in the lab by building traditional engines from the ground up eventually move up to working on Cooper Union's Formula One race car, a single-seat vehicle that's constructed according to strict specifications.
The radiator system on the side, the cooling system, was designed by a master's student that we have, and his interest is in heat transfer and thermodynamics. So he helped us out, doing the appropriate calculations to find out how much cooling the engine needed, what would be the best way to implement it.
Previous students have actually gone from the auto lab here straight into the labs of major automakers, including the General Motors lab that developed the hybrid Chevy Volt. The Volt uses a new kind of hybrid technology than what you'd find in a Toyota Prius and most other hybrids.
And he's an undergraduate, he hasn't gotten a master's, and he's working alongside the people who have invented this powertrain.
And current students seem poised to make their mark on the industry as well.
So we build vehicles here for a competition, and we're trying to make headway from the conventional car that we've been putting out to the hybrid electric competition.
Recently, students took their car to an annual competition held in Michigan by the Society of Automotive Engineers.
They basically have a whole competition where schools around the nation build these cars and race them and compete them and try to basically produce the best product out there.
The competition allowed students to apply the math and science they learned on paper to real work with their hands in the experimental auto lab, and eventually on a racetrack. The team performed well on a few aspects of the competition, but faced a lot of roadblocks.
We had a number of electrical problems that kept us from continuing, unfortunately. My students are there building these things from scratch, their own designs, and a lot of times the parts don't work out the first time. That's not the point. The point is to learn from your experience.
So students went back to the drawing board with what they learned.
I think I came away with a lot better feeling than I thought I would. Despite not competing in all of the events or necessarily placing particularly well.
Students are already retooling their race car for next year's competition. But don't expect to see the car on city streets. In fact, some students working on the team don't drive at all. So for practice, another set of students is working on real-world simulation software that works with a real seat, steering wheel, pedals, and gear shifter that you'd find in a real car.
We're trying to open up eyes and really get a real sensory approach to this, the whole entry as new drivers hit the road.
And once these students put their knowledge to practice, new drivers might have more fun learning as well. Althea Chang, Manhattan.
The effort to make New York a greener city is taking innovators and environmentalists to unexpected places. On roofs and sidewalks, on concrete and asphalt, greenery and gardens are sprouting. The green trend is even moving forward. This is what going green will mean someday soon. The green stuff on top of this bus is going, literally, carrying with it a whole host of possibilities for New York City to get back to nature. That's the brainchild of this man, Marco Castro.
The MTA has 4,500 buses. Like if we covered each of their buses, that would be around 35 acres of new green space in the city, and it would be, that's around 4 Bryant Parks altogether.
Marco Castro is the next generation of green innovators. Installing gardens on city buses is his vision for the future. His master plan is to cover the roofs of cars and buses that roll along the city streets with greenery. Nature on a roll, bringing urban dwellers back to their organic roots.
Just to open our eyes to our environment and just how can we make more ecosystems more cohesive in a way, not so much just value vegetables, but just saying everything's connected in a way, okay, we live in an ecosystem and we cannot be separated from the natural, from the built environment.
Marco is still in the prototype phase of his project. Among other things, he's been researching the most lightweight materials for his gardens in order to be able to approach the MTA with his proposal. So far, he has done projections about how they would look on buses around the city. Despite having a long way to go, Marco's research on green roofs has a strong support in the scientific community. Since 2007, researchers at Columbia University have been looking into the impact of rooftop gardens on New York City. So far, their findings have only been positive.
A tide has changed within urban research, and now this green infrastructure is becoming hot, in my opinion. It's really like people try to think of innovative ways to put green plants into cities. This is one of the most basic innovative ways, and we're starting to experiment with other innovative ways and more challenging settings.
The key to building any roof garden is using lightweight, high-absorbent soil called Gaia, and one type of plant that everyone swears by, sedum.
They're a very distant member of the cactus family. They're a succulent. They are actually the reason they're used is they're very hardy, tough plants. They're very easy to install, very low maintenance.
Audie Rowlands, Chief of Technical Services at the New York City Parks Department, also agrees that plants are being underestimated and underused, especially in a densely inhabiting urban setting like New York.
It's a beautiful idea. It's a great idea. If you notice, when you look down at vehicles now, UPS, school buses, and quite a few other entities that have buses are painting their roofs white, and it makes a lot of difference, because if the roof was black on a 90-degree day, it would be 160 degrees around that area. When you paint it white, it's 90 degrees. When you introduce green life onto that roof, you'll both have insulation advantages and you'll have cooling because it's not black anymore. And the plants themselves cool the area with this procedure called evapotranspiration, where the plants take the water from the ground and it basically evaporates on its surface area. So that concept works. It does work. Parks Department supports it. We haven't gotten through the logistics yet of actually physically installing it in a couple of our trolleys or buses, but it definitely works, and it's something that should be investigated.
And the benefits aren't just for the environment. People come out ahead as well.
A green roof has 20 benefits, at least. It insulates the building. It has carbon sequestering. In other words, it absorbs carbon. It takes carbon out of the carbon cycle. It basically retains water. It filters water. It creates a biosphere for insects and birds. It's also protects the roof. The roof itself doesn't get exposed to ultraviolet rays from the sun and different temperature changes from the sun being exposed. So it also creates an area for people to go up and congregate. At lunchtime and breaks, our guys go up there and relax and have their lunch. It has an enormous amount of benefits.
In a city where every square foot is already being used, where's there space for gardens? Marcos sees the need for fresh ideas, so he turned to the brightest minds for inspiration.
You can put it on a bus, I can put it basically anywhere. Sometimes we would ask kids like, so we put a garden on our bus, where would you put a garden? And they come up with the craziest ideas like, oh, we put it in the doghouse, and we put it on my bicycle, on a hat. And it's just like, obviously it's very out of the box thinking, and you have kids, I mean, they are experts in doing this because they don't have the constraints or the limitations to think like, oh, that's not possible. They can actually just think up. And I think if we can get the same going for adults, like, okay, we can actually think of new solutions, not just adding plants everywhere, but just like, oh, we can think of other ways of living in the city. We can actually live a healthier life.
The trend is clear. People are moving back to the roots, and it's only a matter of time before Marcos' plans to grid the city become a reality. For 219 West, I'm Patricia Ray Mayen.
Cypress Hills Verde is a green initiative in the East New York section of Brooklyn. It involves everything from farmers markets to employment and energy conservation programs. The effort is only a few years old, but some area residents are already reaping the benefits.
Luis Cruz, a Cypress Hills resident for 10 years, got his home here on Logan Street retrofitted 1 year ago. Before getting the work done, expensive energy bills were a big issue.
The problem that I had was the high cost of keeping the house warm in the winter and cold in the summer. There was a lot of air escaping, and some windows didn't close or work properly.
Weatherization retrofitting makes homes energy efficient by improving insulation, fixing drafty windows and doors, and installing low-flow faucets and toilets. As a custodian and father of 4, Cruz could have never afforded the improvements on his own, nor can many of his neighbors. 34% of East New York Cypress Hills residents live below poverty level, making federal funding all the more crucial.
I think that it's really useful for the community, especially for a working-class community that doesn't have the ability to invest in big home improvements.
Cruz's retrofit was funded by the Weatherization Assistance Program, or WAP, which pays for retrofits for low-income residents throughout New York City. He found out about the program through Cypress Hills Local Development Corporation, also known as CHLDC. The organization launched Cypress Hills Verde, a wide-scale green initiative aimed at transforming the neighborhood. The retrofit is saving Cruz $100 a month in energy bills.
I've seen a substantial reduction with the energy that's used in the house in the bill that comes each month. It feels much warmer in the house during the winter and much cooler in the summer, and it stays that way.
Residents of East New York Cypress Hills have long struggled with challenges related to energy efficiency and the environment. For instance, the largely Black and Latino neighborhood has a higher rate of asthma than New York as a whole, according to the latest city statistics. Some see the weatherization program as part of a larger effort to uplift communities weighed down by social, economic, and health issues.
For us, it's really a question of social, environmental, economic justice to improve the environment in the communities that are the most affected by pollution, by all of the effects of the dirty energy economy.
Shepherd's program trains young people from underserved communities for jobs in the green economy. It is partnered with CHLDC. Cariel Fan was part of the Green City Forest pilot program. She was attracted by the idea of helping her community while earning a living wage.
When I found out about this and that I was actually, helping my environment and educating, youth like me to do this and make a difference, that's what was appealing about it.
The program has its challenges, though. The two homes behind me are a prime example. Both homes needed retrofits, and their owners applied for them last spring. Luis Cruz's home, which we saw earlier, has already been retrofitted. But Roberto Diaz is still waiting for the retrofits 1 year later. The program requirements are so strict, it leaves residents like Roberto out in the cold and sweltering in the heat.
Me inspeccionaron la casa.
They inspected my home and told me that in order to begin the work, I had to finish the entire second floor because the apartment was in such a bad state. The process took about 5 months to complete because of the economy. I spent about $25,000.
But not everyone can afford to pay that much money. Simmons points out that recent changes to the federal program have made getting funds difficult for lower-income residents.
Problems like asbestos, mold, and roof leaks have to be addressed beforehand. So when the money isn't there to address those things, and it costs people a lot of money to get those things fixed, it's definitely a barrier in the process, and it's very common when you're signing people up for weatherization to run into those barriers.
Yakima Peña, Cypress Hills Verde coordinator, believes the financial burden should not be on homeowners.
Why not to fix everything and to prepare and create a really healthy environment?
This would allow many more residents to qualify for the retrofit. So far, about 250 private homes have been retrofitted, but many more homes and apartments may be eligible. Meanwhile, Diaz continues to wait, but he says the wait's worth it if he can save big like his neighbor did.
When you have a house, the house is like a child. The effort is worth the pain. For example, the day that you say you're going to do whatever to your property, well, you're doing something that's worth the pain too.
His attitude is like that of many of his neighbors. They understand what they can gain when the community goes green. Kizzy Cox, 219 West in Cypress Hills.
After the break, the growing debate over the size of public school classes. In 2007, New York City committed to reducing the size of public school classrooms. Kindergarten through third grade classes would be capped at 20 students, fourth through eighth grade at 23. But after some initial gains, class sizes are once again growing. When kindergarten teacher Molly Brune arrives at school these days, things are different. 6 years ago, she taught 16 students at her Bushwick school. Today, she teaches a classroom of 24. With so many students, Brune says it takes longer for her to get to the real instruction.
Until you can really understand the students, they can't really understand what you're trying to teach them. And that work just takes a lot longer when you have a larger class. You know, it's a lot easier to get to know 12 students than it is to get to know 25 or 30.
Brune is not alone. In 2008, just over 20% of kindergartners were in classes of 25 or more. Last year, it was 42%. And according to a report from City Council member Brad Lander, the number of first through fifth grade classes with 30 students or more has tripled in the last 3 years. That report says the loss of more than 5,000 teachers over the last 3 years has caused class sizes to swell. In 2010, New York State allowed the city to scale back a class size reduction plan. Lanny Hameson, executive director of Class Size Matters, says that was a major setback.
And yet the city reneged on their promise to keep that program going, and in 2010 eliminated it without any statement to parents or the state.
She says kids learn better in small classes with experienced teachers.
Those are the only two measurable factors that we know lead to better outcomes to kids: experience level and smaller classes.
Last winter, Mayor Michael Bloomberg alarmed small class size advocates. He said an ideal school system would double both teacher pay and class sizes, but cut the educator workforce in half. Critics say that position doesn't stand up to evidence, particularly the 1985 Tennessee study. During the 4-year study, 6,500 students were placed in small classes from kindergarten to third grade. Researchers concluded that learning in smaller classrooms improved the kids' cognitive development. But Douglas Reddy, an assistant professor of education at Columbia Teachers College, says that small classes in New York look more like the Tennessee study's large classes.
In the Tennessee class size study, small was 13 to 17 kids and large was 22 to 26. So they were comparing large, which a lot of teachers in New York City would love to have large in terms of those parameters compared to small.
The Tennessee study also found that small classes have greater impacts on minority students, who are more likely to live in low-income communities with fewer educational resources. Now that finding suggests that it makes sense to start reducing class sizes in low-income communities first, but some say that strategy is a political third rail.
So are you going to tell parents in Nassau County your kids don't need this? I mean, good luck with that.
Reddy says there's evidence that both good teachers and class size influence achievement.
Teacher quality is a lot harder to do. And it's harder to know when we've done it. It's harder to say, look, we are for sure have gotten higher quality teachers in here. Have we gotten smaller class sizes? I can show you the numbers.
For now, teachers like Molly Brune will have to cope with larger classrooms.
I think at this point, I've kind of created this community where we just understand this is how big our class is. These are the things we have to do to make sure everyone is heard.
Joining us now is Lanny Hameson, Executive Director of Class Size Matters. Lanny, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So the increase in class sizes did parallel the economic downturn. Fewer teachers, bigger class sizes. Is this just a budget issue?
Well, it's partly a budget issue, but it's also partly a matter of priorities, because at the same time as we saw increased class sizes, the overall budget of the Department of Education in New York City was going up. And they were spending more money on private contracts, on consultants, on out-of-classroom positions. So we believe that it's a matter of resources, but it's also a matter of how you invest those resources. And the policies of this administration have been extremely misguided in terms of not investing in the classroom where it really makes a difference for the kids.
Now, in terms of priorities, the Tennessee class size study did find that the biggest effects were in kindergarten and first grade, and those effects start to sort of taper off in the second and third grade.
That's a misunderstanding of the research. The long-term effects in terms of higher graduation rates, more likely to go to college, more likely to own your own home, really are correlated for those children who were in multi-years in smaller classes from K to 3. So if you really want to see a long-term impact from your policies, you can't just do it in one grade. You can't just do it for 1 year. You have to do it over the course of several years, and that's what the research shows us.
Now, a lot of policy purists will say that the Tennessee class study is the only large enough study to actually draw conclusions from. Do you agree with that, or do you think there are other evidence?
It's the only large-scale experiment that's ever been done in class size. There are similar studies like SAGE in Wisconsin that were almost purely experimental, semi-experimental, and then there are dozens, if not scores, of studies that show a strong correlation between smaller classes and better outcomes for kids, controlled studies. So I would argue that the absolute best research we have, which is the STAR study, shows very clear and substantial impacts from smaller classes, and much other research also shows that. And on the whole, the research for class size is stronger than for any other K through 12 reform that we have.
Now, Florida and California have tried to do universal class sizes. There's been some criticism. One of the main criticisms is that they were forced to hire a lot of uncertified teachers and that they effectively diluted the quality of their teacher pool. Can New York recruit enough good teachers to, if we did decide to do universal class size reduction?
First of all, the Department of Education will tell you that they get 10 applicants for every job opening they have in the New York City public schools. Second of all, it's also misconstruing the California research to say that the effects were diluted. In fact, the effects were very substantial, especially in high-need school districts, which see high attrition rates because the teachers in very high-need schools in large urban districts with lots of poor kids tend to quit after a few years because they don't have the chance at success. And after class sizes were reduced, those attrition rates went way down, especially in those high-needs districts. So we saw more effective and more experienced teachers after a few years in those very areas.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lanny.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, high fashion on the go. In the beginning, it was a push cart, then the ice cream truck, and then the food truck. Now fashion has gone mobile, moving the runway to a parking lot near you. When people think of shopping for high-end clothes, fancy fabric stores and couture fashion houses usually come to mind. One thing that does not is a truck. Now there are entrepreneurs who are driving fashion forward, literally, and taking designers on the road in boutiques on wheels. One of those entrepreneurs is 29-year-old Joey Wolfer, a designer who left her job as trend director for the Jones Apparel Group so she could launch the Style Liner.
I wanted to come up with a different way to show interesting product from all over the world. I was finding amazing designers and thought, you know what, there's no one to sell them here, and how can I sell them, bring them to the States in a way that's different than regular retail concept.
Wolfer made sure that her truck was the perfect marriage between design and product. The result was 80s nightclub meets bohemian high-end. Inspired by the success of food trucks, Joey Wolfer turned a former potato chip truck into a boutique on wheels. The Style Liner features bracelets like these from France that go for under $50 and bags like these from Spain that go for more than $1,000.
I don't really like to feature designers that are all over, in the department stores, just because I feel like they're out there and I'd rather bring something new.
Of course.
So when a designer becomes too famous, then I move on.
Wolfer's fresh approach to fashion is what brings customers like Nita Quote to her truck.
I love how every piece is individualized. They're all unique in their own way, so I love that you can't really find these pieces anywhere else.
Quote had heard about fashion trucks for some time and wanted to check one out. She came across the Style Liner in a parking lot in Washington, D.C. while out shopping with friends.
It's an amazing business, I think, and I think it's an amazing way to kind of get the word out there, especially if it's a new brand, a new idea, to go to areas that you might not ever go to. So I think it's a really exciting thing.
Robin Sacken sees fashion trucks as a less expensive way to get a business started in the fashion industry and an innovative way to get customers excited to shop.
They love the idea of newness, the idea of a new concept, the idea of change, the idea of somebody going out there and, traveling with my, I'm traveling to find the product and I'm traveling with a truck. Is $8.25.
The concept may be new, but Wolfer's connection to fashion is not. Her great-great-grandfather, Michael Marks, co-founded British retailer Marks & Spencer's. The biggest business challenge that her grandfather faced as a Russian immigrant was learning English. Today, Wolfer's challenge is to translate the idea of delivery truck grunge into boutique chic.
Because it isn't something that people have done, so you can't look up a manual and say, well, how do you run a truck? How do you run a boutique on wheels? Or how do I figure out a way that the product can stay when I'm driving? Or, how do I convince people that this is real?
Fashion trucks have sprung up across the United States, including the Fashion Truck in Boston, Vintage Mobile in Dallas, and Lay Fashion Truck in Los Angeles. More fashion trucks means more parking space taken, and this was expected to cause backlash from store owners, as with food carts. But it hasn't. Fashion truck owners have found a way to display their merchandise without upsetting local businesses. They collaborate with merchants by co-hosting events and are careful about parking right in front of traditional stores. However, the idea of buying an outfit in a truck will still take time to become a regular way to shop.
I don't think that's what everybody is used to, but just like if you told me, 5-6 years ago, I'd be buying a whole bunch of stuff off my phone, I probably said you're crazy. So it's all really an education, and I think that the more we educate the consumer about all the different avenues that you can buy and the way you can shop, I think it will happen.
Where you usually go around?
Now that the trend is out there, people are becoming more comfortable spending in a truck as they would in a store. For Wolfer and other fashion truck owners, the goal is to expand their businesses. Wolfer wants to buy more trucks stationed in different parts of the country so that she can bring fashion to a roadway near you. And that's it for this month's edition of 219 West from the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Thanks for watching. I'm Melissa Noel, and we'll be back next month with more stories from the 5 boroughs and beyond.